We are going to start with Ellen Durkin tonight. Ellen Durkin is an artist, blacksmith who creates forged fashion combining art, blacksmithing, and fashion. Her interest in fashion was inspired by her fascination with moving metal. After growing up in Wilmington, Delaware, she continued on to get an MFA in sculpture. She was introduced to forging from the decorative art side of life instead of the functional and utilitarian option. Her current wearable series started as a decorative life-size stationary pieces inspired by her large-scale drawings. This led to her current growing performance runway-like series, Forged Fashion. Ellen's metalwork challenges traditional views of how craftsmanship is applied, while posing dynamic and relevant psychological questions. She believes that her delicate and elaborate metalwork is completely viewed when the human body is inside of it.
Thank you. Yay, I did the things. All right, obviously I'm Ellen Durkin and I'm going to talk quickly and click. So if you have questions, just shoot them off in the chat, I suppose. I started working in blacksmithing probably about 10, 12 years ago. I was the assistant at Peters Valley around 2008 when I was in graduate school. That kind of piqued my interest in forging, even though I had very, very minimal skills at that point. I have a master's degree in fine art, so drawing and design have always been really heavy on my side of things. Here's a sketch of one of my earlier ideas. It's about 8 foot tall by 4.5 foot wide. So I do these large scale drawings based around the figure and this idea of like fashion and metal. This is an earlier piece that I did in copper. It's also the first piece I ever did in copper, which was mildly insane to do a piece like this if you've never worked in copper. I like to combine a bunch of different techniques, from like forging to different jewelry techniques, then later like raising and chasing and repoussé work. There's some like raising in this piece and a lot of different techniques that I find interesting. So I say if it interests you, then you should probably just go for it. This piece is made up of 3 separate pieces. So the skirt's separate from like the middle section, and then the top part is separate. The bust is made out of brass. It's patinaed brass in like 4 raised sections, and the skirt panels are all symmetrically forged pieces that wrap around the figure. And it gets a little tricky to try and make it fit the body, so I started adding leather to it. So it's all harnessed around the waist, so the weight of it is on your hips instead of causing excessive pain elsewhere, which I learned through my process, since my original pieces were these large stationary dress cages, which one of our presenters here tonight had the honor of wearing, and I almost killed her. This piece is a corset and top and collar that I did, and it's all pierce work. So if anyone's ever done pierce work before, then they understand. I think it was like 16 gauge steel. Yeah, it's kind of weird talking to like nobody. I threw in some sketches as well, because I do a lot of drawing when I design things. This is one of my earlier pieces where I started working with sheet metal, and then I started getting to the raising and combining the raising and forming with pierce work. And the design elements, I design them all as one piece. So the corset matches the top and then the neck piece. And even on the leather, you can see the same pattern that's in the pierce work is in the leather and on the bra part. When I design these, I start with a couple simple pieces, and then when I put them together, I decide whether it needs more elements to it or not. Also, the face pieces you can see in a lot of my drawings early on, probably around 2008, they started showing up with these restrictive face mechanisms. Here's a piece, it's a 4 separate pieces. And I get into these like locket kind of hingy door style things, and it opens 2 parts this way, and then the little round thing opens up as well. And on the runway, it's pretty cool to watch the model kind of engage with it. So I'm probably gonna go more that direction in like my like kind of continuing that body of work. More sketches, lots of things that make no sense to anybody, make hardly sense to me. But I really promote people drawing and designing things, even though they might not think they can draw or whatever. Here's another one of those pieces that hinges open. So like the Gothic inspired trifold triptych idea in there. I wish it was open. It's not open though. The face piece also opens 2-part, and that's all like chasing repoussé raised work, and the copper face part, and then the outside is steel, and that's kind of got a raised and jewelry hand cut rose window idea in there. Next slide. There we go. There's a closer view of it. I was originally just going to do a copper part, and then I decided it would be cool to do a 2-part with a 2-part hinge, and it opens up all the way. There's a video I can send you a link to where we did models in it from the ages of, I think, 13 to 75, and it hinges open with all these women inside of it, and it's pretty cool. And that's copper and leather and steel. I don't know how I'm doing on time, so someone can just yell at me. That's it, open all the way. Burnishing that piece with the leather on it was super awkward and fun. I started working with a friend of mine, who's now a good friend of mine, a photographer, probably like 5 years ago. And he kind of took my pieces in like a whole other direction that I couldn't take them in because I don't have the, I'm not a photographer, I don't have that background, but I think it's important to find people that get your, get what you're trying to do, and they can present it in a way that you necessarily, you might not be able to see or do. This is one of my regular models that I work with. This is Corey. I just wanted to put pieces in here because they change depending on who's wearing them. And then whenever I put people in pieces, it's important for them to be comfortable in whatever they're wearing. And I try and see what pieces they're attracted to, or what the kind of speak to them, I guess, for a better word, and find something that makes sense for whatever they're going through or whatever their vibes are, I guess. So it changes depending on who's in it. This is my friend Jess, and if you follow me on social media, you probably know Jess because I've tortured her in all of my pieces for a long time, and we documented her cancer treatments through my work a bunch. I took out a lot of the images, so if you want to see more of them, you can check out my website. But we followed her whole process. This is also Jess from one of my shows, I think 3 years ago or so. The collars, what is it? Maybe 22 gauge steel, and it's all pierce work. So like the plates were super big and like stabbing me in my neck when I was trying to saw them out. My saw frame could barely wrap around the form, so it was a little bit tricky to get, but I had to design it so it wasn't super heavy, just a little bit choky. And some more sketches. Someone yell at me when I'm out of time. I didn't time myself. You can see these little eyeballs popping up in some like recent work as well. And some more collars and skirts, and this is Joe's work. This is a series that I did with Shanna, who's going to be speaking shortly. We did a runway show together 2 years ago, and we cast models between the ages of 14 and 72. And I think the dynamic in our work worked really well, especially with the context of all the different age women. This is one of our models on the runway. She's opening up the hingy doors. And we had like original music for the show and aerial performers open it. So I'm kind of working for like a big performance runway kind of thing. And our final model was 72 and she was a boss bitch and she slayed the runway, and most of the women over 40 hadn't walked the runway at all. We picked women that we thought were cool and they would enjoy it, and that was pretty cool. One more, there's my pregnant lady, and we drowned ourselves. That's that piece. So I just keep pushing what I'm comfortable with. And it's a copper piece that I did. There we go. I think we're in time.
Perfect. Perfect timing. So Ellen Durkin, you can get this off the screen or you can get this on the chat. Thank you so much. I love how you make metal look like lace. It's amazing to me. Our next speaker tonight is Jessica Thompson. Jessica has a BFA in painting and drawing from Pennsylvania State University and MFA in ceramics from Alfred University. She teaches at Mendocino College in coastal Northern California. Jessica is a lifelong meditation and yoga practitioner and tends to have a curating projects and environmental activism going on the side. She's a mother of 2 little boys and co-directs the Flynn Creek Pottery Studio and Artist Residency with her husband, wood-fire potter Nick Schwartz. Welcome, Jessica.
Thanks. Let's see. I think I'm unmuted. Let's see if I can do this expeditiously. Everybody, can you see my screen?
We can see
Beth?
and we can hear. Things are good.
Here we go. All right. So I started out, I grew up in Ohio as the 5th generation in a family of blue-collar ceramic factory workers. So this is our cupboard at home, and this very solid, square, simple, basically like mid-century hotel and dinerware was what I grew up with. But I had some talent, so they sent me to art school, and they figured I was going to study fine art, and I was going to, you know, sort of rise above those blue-collar roots. And I studied painting. You know, I was very interested in Western art and sort of accepted the version of history I was given. I felt like there was this glorious narrative going on. But already, you know, this is like a 10-foot oil painting from my undergraduate show. And I was already looking at sort of the darker side of what was going on in those stories. It's the sacrifice of Isaac. You know, there's a darker narrative. So I was looking at the classical, the draperies, the fabric, the anatomy, but seeing that there was something I hadn't really been taught, I guess. And so when I graduated from school, much to my family's horror, I decided I was going to move to California and become a production potter. And I got an apprenticeship in Ukiah, California, not far from here. And I stayed there for 4.5 years and threw pots. Because I had been at Penn State. They had this wonderful ceramics program, and you know, there we were painting all these images of things, and they were actually making these things that were instrumental in people's daily lives, that really were radical in terms of like handmade functional pottery. You know, it's not a factory product. So I really went for it. I met my husband, Nick Schwartz, not long after arriving out here. We didn't get married till 8 years later, but the folks at Peters Valley know him as a potter and teacher. And eventually, once I learned how to make the pots pretty solidly, I started putting the images back onto them with a sense of humor and, you know, sort of some of that academic drawing interest, but just starting to look at like these human relationships and animal relationships, and just enjoying them, but also starting to be a little more critical of them. So I was living on a farm, raising all these different animals, chickens and pigs, and I had my first dog. And, you know, so here's this mortal battle between these beasts down below. And the dog up above is just performing his personal hygiene, you know. So I was trying to keep a sense of humor about the whole thing, but here I was out in the world, and out here, like, people really question things in a big way. So here's some blue and white ceramics. It's an old sort of bedroom hygiene set, you know, the pitcher and basin. It's about 36 inches tall, and the blue and white floral pattern is starting to sort of break down. There's some effluent there. Just trying to sort of undo some of the sort of art historical narrative. And things are getting bigger. And oh, I forgot to start my timer. Gosh, I'm sorry. Okay, I'm going to talk faster. Just enjoying the historical conventions, getting a little raunchy with them, and getting a little non-Western, looking at spirit houses, and starting to think about how things could be more serve more of a ceremonial function rather than utilitarian, and then how they might serve an architectural function. So if these poor pots are going to have all this stuff piled all over them, they might as well have more of like a sacred or spiritual function, maybe. So, but these pots, you know, again, they're wonderful spiritual objects. This is a Han Dynasty funerary urn from somewhere around the turn of the millennium, BC to AD, meaning, you know, it's sort of like he who dies with the most stuff wins in terms of all this stuff piled on top. So I sort of piled all my personal stuff on these. They make a great canvas though, and they're not square, they're round, so that story spirals on itself over and over and over again as you turn the pot, and so it's not linear, and that's a really fun kind of canvas to have. So these are getting up to like 42 inches tall or something, and I'm sort of working the whole range from 2D out to 3D. And that's a fun thing about building on top of pots. And then eventually they lose their openings and just become sculptural objects. But I like this idea of the greedy human, you know, the fingers and sort of the precariousness that creates for us. We take these historical structures and we sort of abuse them in a way, but our intentions are good, I guess. So I went to grad school at Alfred in 2009, and I decided, okay, the poor pots, forget the pots. I'm gonna build the actual sculptures. I'm gonna take them off the pots, and I was calling them tonkas. So I designed these things where I had this giant painting behind them, and I was just throwing all these production items and piling them up in front and trying to see what that did with the landscape. Or trying out the multi-armed Hindu Buddhist goddesses, like you could go and stand inside this one and put your arms in it. And I always have my beast there with me. And, but still, you know, it's like sort of about trying to upset the structure, like take the tea set and pile it up as though it's gonna get burned in the wood pile. Or in terms of honesty, like just enjoying the way things look when they accumulate on your shelf, rather than in like this way that you stage them for a show. So anyway, when I came home, I had sort of my first one-liner idea of my whole life, which was something I ended up working on for about 10 years. And I call it The Last Fall. And the idea is you walk into this installation and it's as though somebody has cut down the tree of knowledge and turned it into firewood. So foolish humans, the snake is waiting there behind the wood pile to bite us because there's not going to be any more fruit, you know? And I've kept working along those lines. I like making the apples because they're a production item. I can sit down and throw them, and whenever I run out and sell them, I can just make more. So here's sort of a close-up. I throw the logs too and put them together, and that snake is always waiting there. I have an idea for a big piece. This is sort of a smaller version of a greedy snake eating lots of apples. They're all stuck in his gut, and I'm gonna make a huge one with lots of sort of a giant Celtic knot of snakes eating each other's tails and multiple heads all eating apples. But, you know, these days I have lots of plans because I have children, and here's Phoenix and Archer in their dad's kiln. And so I have lots of drawings and maquettes. Like the painting behind this one is their feet, made by their feet. And this is a maquette for a sort of a ruins of a temple. Or here's like a banquet that's sort of over and the banqueteers have become the consumed. Or a temple that's either under construction or it's fallen. We don't really know. I think that's kind of where we are right now. Are we building something or are we destroying it? That's a big question that I have. So I've been working on columns, mixing up the column pieces with statuary, guardian animals, the idea of the animals coming out of the trees like the lorax, and loving that idea of the apple tree as generative, but also like part of this old myth of the Garden of Eden. These vanitas paintings from the early Renaissance that are about our mortality and sort of the futility of our accumulation. So basically, I love the art historical structures, but I like them when they're imperfect. So, you know, here are some dogs halfway built, and they're great, you know, implies a lot of things. Or this recent group of sculptures is a giant statue. It got to about 6 feet, and it was all built out of clay out of our hillside. And I thought, wow, this clay's doing great. Look at it go. And then one day it just collapsed like the Twin Towers. It was terrible. And so I was left with these haunches like this part and the tail. You know, the tail here was left. And so I started piecing them together and realized that our visual language and our touch is present in everything we make. It doesn't always have to be so specific and laborious, you know? So I'm really enjoying that right now. And then about a year ago, I don't know where I am for time because I forgot to start the timer, but a year ago, I went to Nepal for the summer. I spent a couple months there because I've been studying yoga and meditation and Buddhism for about 20 years. And I thought, I'm just gonna go find out where all this stuff came from and how it really functions from the get-go. You know, why did this stuff come to be? So I went to Mustang and lived there for 2 months. I came back and serendipitously found myself as the student of a Tibetan Thangka painter here, about an hour away. So here's a drawing that I did as an exercise. It's on the grid. You can see how the grid is laid out, but I think we really idealize too much. So I'm gonna focus on the wrathful deities. She prevents plague and pestilence. She's Rahula. And I've got my first canvas built. So I'm on this track of like a 6 to 10 year apprenticeship. And I'm going to bring these non-Western images in from this culture that's oppressed by the Chinese.
Oh,
I'm going to do Vajrapani. He's the god of wisdom and guardian. So there we go.
sorry, Jess. I cut you off.
No, that's the end.
And I want you, oh, very awesome. Awesome. I want you here. I can't wait till you can come back. I hope that it works and we can have you on campus. It'd be awesome.
Thanks.
Really, really awesome.
Thanks for listening, everybody.
Shannon Shannah Warwick is a fashion designer, textile designer living in the woods in upstate New York, who will be our next speaker. She works primarily in Nuno felting and fabric dyeing techniques. She received her BFA at the University of the Arts and went on to receive her teaching certificate from Moore College of Art. Shannah's clothing line, Black Boots, is sold online in specialized boutiques in Philadelphia and New York City and at various vending markets. She has a darker sensibility with appreciation for avant-garde construction. Her work has been featured in fashion magazines and publications. She feels her work truly embodies the term wearable art. Welcome, Shannon.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Okay, we've got it.
We did it. We can see it?
Yep.
Hooray.
Perfect.
So thank you for having me. Again, I'm Shannah Warwick. I am the person that Ellen tried to kill, but she didn't kill. I'm still here. I have a long kind of history with Peters Valley, so it's really exciting to come back in this capacity. So I'm an artist, designer, teacher, and I call myself an all-around creative hustler. I've been making wearable work for the past like 15 years or so, and my brand, Black Boots, is all about making things that can be worn with your favorite black boots. I primarily work in 2 different techniques. I do hand dyeing of textiles and Nuno felting. And for the hand dyeing, I use a couple different process is, this is ice dyeing. So on the grate underneath there, kind of in this area, this is where the silk organza is, and then these are chunks of ice that have the fiber reactive dye on top. So the dye, or I'm sorry, the ice acts as a barrier between the fabric and the dye itself. So as that ice melts, it all the different little dye molecules will hit the fabric at different times. It kind of gives this like molten kind of watercolor pattern on the fabric. This is something that I also teach. This is one of my students. I love this slide just because she was so happy to make this piece. This is on Kona cotton. And this is the previous slide. This is, I've named it my fire dye from this point. So it's a bunch of different colors, probably about 4 different colors that I add. And I like to mirror the fabric so that when I open it up, I can just kind of play off of those patterns in the fabric. And once I have the fabric created, once I have it dyed, I'll then felt into it. So this piece is one of my fire dresses. The black on it is wool roving, so it's merino wool that's felted down into the weave of the silk. And with these pieces, I've kind of played around with the idea of having the wool in certain spots and kind of leaving some of the just dyed work opened up. Another thing I've been doing more recently is working with natural dyes. This is black walnut dye. It's over the open fire. And the black walnut I dyed into this piece, which is silk chiffon. And then I unifelted. This is for the stag full moon. I've been kind of following and intentionally working with the phases of the moon and kind of working that into the aesthetic. And with that, I've also created these altar cloths. So smaller kind of companion pieces to go along with the wearable work. I moved up from Philadelphia about 5 years ago. So I'm living in the middle of the woods, and I started photographing my work in the woods. And this is one of my pieces that I first made when I moved up here. It's silk chiffon, unifelted with the wool, and then the edge here is all hand sculpted. I take little pieces of tulle and I kind of fold them and sew them into these little fans, and then I'll use a heat gun on them and kind of mold all the different pieces and then hand sew it together. So it creates these creates this volume. Here's another piece, a big skirt that was done with that. I haven't done a ton of these because they take forever, and I literally, when I'm making them, I'm kind of like having to crawl inside of them and hand sew everything together. The unifelting was really something that happened kind of organically as I tried to avoid the sewing machine. So being able to sculpt things, whether it's the felting work or working with the tool this way. And then Ellen and I collaborated, again, she spoke about that, on a runway show down in Delaware, and this was another heat set tulle skirt. And I've started working some millinery work, some traditional, but also just kind of playing with different materials and adding kind of different appliques and that sort of thing. With the different collections that I'm doing, I'm also working on styling and choosing the muse. This is Corey Wade. Obviously, Ellen and I have a lot of crossover in like friendships, and so I worked with Corey as well. And this is in the home of Adam Wolokovich. So it's like this really kitsch, beautifully decorated home. And I created this neck piece for Corey to wear. This is another one. This is in Adam's Jules Verne room. So this is a neck piece that I created, and I added, these are all long leather strands. I worked and collaborated with a leather worker for these pieces. Just another one from that series. And once I moved up here, I kind of lost some of the connections that I had in the city, and wanted to start kind of traveling around. So I started working with the Oddities Flea Market and vending at these different shows and creating work that was kind of speaking a little bit more, I guess, just to that crowd. And this is a photographer, Anna Sirota, that I met online to do some of that promo work. This is another piece. This is a nebula tunic. So this is ice-dyed silk organza, and then I've, again, felted into the collar here and playing around with where the felted work is, or where the wool is added to the piece versus where it's just the hand-dyed work. This is another collaboration I did. This is another fire dress. I sent this piece out to a photographer in Belgium, and he creates these post-mortem fairy tale characters. I just like being able to see my work in different, just, you know, through someone else's lens, through someone else's eyes, and kind of how, and it helps kind of just like go back and forth and kind of play around with what I want to add to and, you know, take away from my work. And of course, a two-headed crow. Who doesn't love two-headed crows, right? And then more recently with COVID kind of, you know, changing everything in our world, I've been just looking at the different systems and kind of dissecting just what's kind of going on. And because I can't orchestrate these photo shoots or runway shows, I started kind of like putting all the pieces together and photographing them myself and just seeing what I could do with that. I was also looking at Rembrandt's work, just again with that idea of like dissecting our systems and what's kind of, you know, what all of this really means. And then, you know, the mask came into play, and this is a sample, an early sample. So I, you know, just trying like to combine the different pieces together and see kind of what they look like when I photograph them. And then I had the idea to then mirror the images and like what's the positive and negative space, and, you know, just kind of what that does to the work itself and what it's saying. I get a little bit more literal with this Red Cross kaftan, just thinking about, you know, our nurses and doctors working and kind of, again, just like this idea of dissection and like opening things up and like seeing sort of what's going on. The stripes, the red and black stripes started showing up. When you're laying out the wool over top of the silk chiffon, it's really like meditative, and it really appeals to my Virgo rising, just this idea of like organization and how the wool can be laid out onto the silk. Taking the sacred hearts, fleeting hearts, they started kind of showing up, and, you know, I pushed that idea a little bit further. I made these like this heart sort of chest piece. It's still kind of a work in progress. I'm not really sure. This skirt was originally in my store in New York City, and unfortunately the owner of the store passed away, and just sort of this idea of mortality and like where things were going, kind of what was happening all around us, and yeah, that just kind of started showing up. And then I started, this is again a kind of a work in progress. I started adding the video and the motion and just seeing what that kind of did to the work. Not the best resolution here, but just kind of looking at my work in a different way and just kind of seeing what that looks like. Here's another one. I started laying out this like graph, these long red pieces of fabric, just to create these this grid work. And yeah, I'm just gonna kind of let things go organically, see what they're happening. It's nice to be able to sort of work in the moment instead of kind of really adhering to the fashion calendar. So I guess that's something good that I can say has come of our pandemic. So thank you again for having me.
This is awesome, and we're going to move along. It's really hard for me to switch gears and to get so deep into what you're just talking about and then have to do this. I could talk to you forever. Thank you for sharing with us tonight. Clare Murray Adams is our next artist. She has been, has a 25-year background and career as a contemporary quilt maker. She received her BFA from Kent State University and MFA from Vermont College. She is a professor emeritus of art and former chair of the visual art department at Malone University in Canton, Ohio, where she taught fiber arts, fundamental courses, and printmaking. She was awarded a month-long residency at Gentile in Wyoming in 2005, where she concentrated on encaustic, calligraphic printing, and mixed media. Claire currently teaches workshops in encaustic, mixed media collage, and calligraphic printmaking, and exhibits throughout the United States. Welcome, Claire.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I was happy to be able to get this screen share come right up. So
Smooth as ice.
So I'm going to talk about a 20-year journey that I've been on. And it looks like there's been a lot of different takes on clothing tonight. So you're going to see my take on clothing. Early in my career, one of my mentors told me it takes 20 years to become an artist. It seemed daunting at the time, but now after 25 plus years, I really am beginning to understand what she was talking about. I feel I truly found my voice when I started working with clothing and aspects of memory. It was an easy shift from the contemporary quilt background to working with other fabrics. So the following images represent some of my growth involving fabrics and clothing, stitching, transfer processes, encaustic paint, and collage. Initially, I was drawn to working with found clothing, primarily dresses, and items that had a history and often showed some wear. Still fertile forces one to think about biological clock and time, something that I think a lot of women go through at some time in their life. While the truth about sticks and stones questions the saying, which implies that words cannot hurt someone. But we all have felt the sting of name calling. The use of stitching and imagery embody the dresses with the meaning suggested by the titles. So on that little shelf underneath the white dress is a pile of sticks, a pile of stones, and a pile of bones. The same idea works here with this child's jacket. The drawing of the ribs and feather along with a real feather does what I often like to do. Make my materials match the meaning of the work. Soul Doll combines a vintage quilt with clothing and imagery of myself, my mom, and my grandmother. The imagery can be found in the heart area of the dress. It's a chemical transfer onto that dress piece. It's about 3 generations of women in my family who sewed. My grandmother who made quilts, my mother who made most of my clothes when I was growing up, and myself, who has made art quilts and other forms of fiber-related art. This is also the first use of encaustic in my work. The dress was aged and stiffened by using wax on some of the ruffle areas, those dark brown sections. The wax also references a cocoon or the preserved idea of family histories. Ooh, why isn't there anything there? In her closet, eventually I wanted to subtract the nostalgic aspect of the work by designing and sewing dresses that looked more like current clothing. So each dress that's in the installation, which was on the previous slide that didn't open up, they embody a characteristic of human nature, like being an introvert perhaps, or by feeling constricted. The characteristics in the dresses describe a universal quality that anybody can have, even though they're dresses and it looks like it's an all feminine kind of aspect. I found in discussing this with a lot of people that men are understanding and accepting of the qualities that I'm trying to express. In this slide, defensive and disconnected, I can look at these pieces now and I can see how they describe to many of us the experiences that are going on in the pandemic. We might keep to ourselves and put out some body language that pushes others away, like the pointy parts of that defensive dress or the arms crossed. Or we might feel disconnected from our family and friends in many ways, and even from ourselves, like in the second dress. In the same way, thin-skinned in our current environment can be seen as referencing racism. The piece is about name-calling, with the little pouches attached to the dress holding derogatory names that most people would find offensive. In another shift in the work, I became more interested in drawing dresses as opposed to making actual pieces of clothing and making things that were a little more abstracted. These two pieces were drawn and painted, then dipped in encaustic medium, which gives them more body and makes them more of an object. Dipping them in the wax also allowed me to incise them and then print on them the scale or the iron that you see on these two pieces. They're not as dimensional as sewn dresses, but they seem to have a greater presence than just a drawing on paper. This is the third piece in that series. It's called Insecure. And I remember how my mom would string my gloves or my mittens together, clipping them onto a string and then running that string through my jacket so that they would be there and somehow not lost on the bus on the way to school. And now when I look at this, it seems the height of insecurity to have to do that, but something that we still, sometimes even I still feel and wish I had that string to connect me. The sculptural possibilities of encaustic led me to this piece. It begs the question, who is reluctant to let go of the apron strings, the mother or the child, or maybe both to some degree? How long do those apron strings have to be before someone is willing to let go? In another attempt to further subtract or reduce the kinds of elements I was using, I eliminated clothing entirely, using just this torso form with an opening in the chest area where I could display items and then expand upon their meaning in photography and photographs and in collages. Wow, another one that's not there. This is the encaustic on paper collage that was in the slide that we didn't see. I just don't know how to retrieve those slides when that comes up green like that. This piece was on display at the Making Matters exhibit at Peters Valley a couple of years ago. So this is that torso that had scissors and some sewing utensils inside of it. And I had manipulated it, the photograph that I took, by using bleach and Drano and then sanding the paper a little bit and then doing some stitching on it. Then incorporating these other these other encaustic collage elements. Oops. Body and soul are two torso figures that hold objects that metaphorically represent aspects of either body or soul. So the bones, one is filled with bones, and that represents body, and then the other one is filled with something more ethereal, like silk organza, to represent soul. I even made two separate stands for them that fit better with, each stand fit better with whatever the torso was representing. Tough as Nails is a piece that will be displayed this fall in an exhibit entitled The Resilience of Women, about the 100-year anniversary of women receiving the right to vote. It's pretty close to what the shelf life piece looked like, which had a torso and then all of where those pictures of the women are, there were all the photographs that I had taken inside. So it's a similar format to that piece. And I kind of feel that maybe I was pressing my luck by doing this same format, but I feel like the work incorporates many of the materials that I've used throughout my journey: fabric, found ephemera, zippers, and encaustic paint. Once again, I decided to move a little bit away from using dresses or even the torso, and I was abstracting the work even further. There's a reference here to clothing. There's little reference here to clothing or torsos, just stick figures from tree branches that are bound with cloth in a way that suggests people. Family group on the left is a mother and daughter who are tied together. along with a brother and another sister. The work incorporates many of the materials I've used throughout my journey. And then there's a detail of the, what I would call the face or headpiece of the one sister, which also uses encaustic wax and some gut kind of materials. Hard-hearted and soft-hearted are also from that series. The detail shows the kind of materials that were used to convey a hard heart. So the hard heart has metal, nails and wire in it. And then the soft-hearted piece has yarn and fabrics in it. I carved out areas in the branches and put those items in them. And then they're surrounded by zippers that look like you can zip or unzip the branch. And then there's encaustic paint over the bark. So I know that my artistic journey is ongoing and evolving, and I'm pretty sure that clothing and figure references will always come and go in my work. So thanks for the opportunity. That's it.
Thank you, Claire. That surface on those last couple pieces is blowing me away. Gorgeous. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you.
Luci Jockel is our next presenter. She is a jewelry artist living in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and working in Towson, Maryland. She currently holds the position of metalsmithing and jewelry lecture coordinator at Towson University. Luci has recently been honored with a 2019 American Craft Council Emerging Voices Award as a shortlisted artist. She has taught at Rhode Island School of Design, UArts, and here at Peters Valley School of Craft. Luci's work has been shown at various venues, including ACC Conference 2019, Schmuck Munich Jewelry Fair, New York City Jewelry Week, Snag, and Gallery Marseille. Her work has been featured in publications such as New Brooches, Metalsmith Magazine, and American Craft Magazine. Luci maintains a studio practice as part of the JV collective at Bach in South Philadelphia, and continues to exhibit her work both nationally and internationally. Welcome, Luci. Luci, turn on your audio.
Okay, there we go. It wasn't letting me unmute. Thank you.
I know.
Thank you for introducing me. And thank you all for listening. My name's Luci Jockel, and so I really wanted to focus on work that kind of stems from my experience at Peters Valley as a fine metals fellow in 2017. Let's see here. Okay. So my experience at Peters Valley was really a foundation of my career as a teacher and a craftsperson. As the fellow, I was able to experience different instructors every week with different perspectives, a different point of view. So I really, today in my, as I teach, I really think about this experience and pull from that. This summer I was going to teach a workshop called Mementos Cold Connections, and the students were going to learn how to make wearable mementos from found objects, and by learning cold connection techniques, which you'll see I use a lot in my work. And I was also going to cover the history of memento mori and mourning jewelry, which I also reference in my work as well. So this is the crew, some of the crew. I think there's still a few people missing from the 2017 Peters Valley assistants and fellows. And I was really able to build connections that I still maintain today with these people and with instructors and students. It was a really important part and kind of a turning point in my career as an artist. And actually my roommate is in this photo, and I met her this summer at Peters Valley. She was the photo assistant. I'm lucky to have found that sense of community again as being part of JV Collective, which Beth had mentioned earlier. JV Collective is a group of 7 jewelry 7 jewelry artists who I maintain a studio with in South Philadelphia, though 2 of them are currently located outside of the state. And we have an exciting exhibition that I want to speak about that's currently in the works, but I'll speak about that a little bit later. This is a piece called Rosarium that I spent most of the summer at Peters Valley working on and off, because it took a lot of patience to work on this piece. It's made of honeybee wings and PVA glue, and this ongoing series using the honeybee wings is meant to bring attention to the current decline of the honeybee population. So I used, as I mentioned, archival glue to connect the honeybee wings together into this kind of lace material. Then I had formed them into spheres by using, by pressing this lace into a steel dapping block, which if you know anything about jewelry, it's a tool that you're able to make half domes out of metal. And then I further coated the piece with honeybee propolis to kind of solidify the forms. And propolis is a type of resinous honeybee byproduct. So this is kind of where it began in 2014. This is just a 1 by 1 inch little study of how to kind of connect this piece of the honeybee, these remains that I found so beautiful, and also kind of really representational of their fragility in their current state. I acquired the honeybee wings from a beekeeper in Rhode Island who had lost his bees that winter due to just the weather. In exchange, I worked with him to prepare his hives for new colonies. This is a video of the latest piece that I made. It's much larger, and it's a study for a life-size veil that I'm working towards. You can see here that it's a somewhat flexible, yet still very delicate paper-like material. I actually kind of ripped it a little bit when I made this video because it's fragile, but it becomes lace-like. And for this series, I'm drawing from Victorian hair mourning jewelry. I'm looking a lot at that. I've researched a lot about that, and rituals such as wearing veils while mourning. Okay. So this piece called For a Blacksmith was actually for a blacksmith at Peters Valley that summer. I did a trade with Ivan Goodman, who I think I might have said that he was the assistant that summer, and he was also a beekeeper. So we agreed to do a trade where he would give me the honeybee propolis that I mentioned earlier that he made, and it was from his hives, and I would make him a piece of jewelry. So I went down to the blacksmith shop and took some steel scrap and a piece of coal, and then I made this pendant for him, putting that lattice work of the honeybees over top. Recently, I continued this fossil-like series. It kind of stemmed from that. Gallery Loop, who is a contemporary jewelry gallery that I am now represented by, they invited me to do their One World exhibition, which was very recently, and it featured the work of artists that were responding to COVID-19. And during this whole pandemic, I've been really thinking a lot about mental wellness. I mean, on top of the physical wellness or illness that's been happening. And through the mental wellness, what are ways in which we find mental clarity, where we're being bombarded with all this information?
I think Lucy's frozen.
I'll show this
There we
video
go.
then. So you can see once I hold this up to the light that the stone kind of transforms.
Mm.
And so as I was sanding the piece and polishing it more and more, that clarity came through the surface more. Okay. And I guess I'm still good on time, Beth. So I just wanted to go over a few more works. I work with bone as well, and this is a full snake spine vertebrae knotted with freshwater pearls into a continuous pearl necklace. And the piece really questions what we find value in, which is a lot of what my work is questioning. I wanted to walk through this last piece I'm going to show, the process of making this brooch from the series called Linked, where I'm making chain from deer bone. And I was really thinking a lot about connections and links physically as a form, but also as a relationship to nature and our environment. So I sliced the form from this rigid form into a more fluid form, and then formed the chain by slicing and cutting each one individually, and then putting them all back together. And this is how it's worn. Okay, so I just wanted to go over lastly a couple of things that I'm working on besides my artwork. I'm currently curating an adornment exhibition at Towson University with called All Decked Out, and it's opening in August. So I'm really excited about that. And also JV Collective is working on an exhibition called In School Suspension, and it's our first call for entry where we're showing pendants and necklaces that explore the theme of the coming of age or high school experiences. And so both of these have been really interesting because they've shifted from being intended to be in person to now going mostly fully online. And it's been interesting, but it's also kind of exciting to figure out these different modes and ways to communicate artwork that can't really be experienced in person. And one thing I think that is positive that's coming out of this is the ability to have artist lectures, which like this right now, this platform is kind of incredible, and I feel really lucky to have been a part of this. So thank you again for inviting me to speak and for listening.
Thank you, Luci. This is incredible. This is one of my favorite activities on campus, and it continues to be one of my favorite activities through the pandemic. It's great food for thought. I hope it carries you through. That does conclude our virtual instructor presentations for this week. I hope you all join us again next week at 7 p.m. on Friday, and we'll welcome another group of great, talented folks to share their work with you. Thank you all for attending. See you then. Bye-bye.